So hi everyone, my name's Susan. I'm a member of the Wirral Climate Action Group. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We're really honoured to have all the attendees and all the speakers. Special thanks to Roger Phillips for agreeing to chairing our event. We're really happy to have you. And special thanks to all our speakers who've given up their time to share their expertise and knowledge with us tonight. If anyone would like to submit a question to the Q&A, if you hover your cursor towards the bottom of the screen, you'll be able to enter it there. I do hope you'll appreciate we won't be able to answer all the questions just because of the volume that we'll receive. We really hope you enjoy the event, and over to Roger. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Susan. And welcome to what is really the most important issue of our time, despite COVID and Brexit and many other things. In the next couple of hours, we'll hear first briefly from 3 politicians, hopefully. It might just be 2 because one hasn't quite connected with us. And then 9 speakers will give their different take on different issues around climate change. After that, at about 8 o'clock, we'll have an hour for a Q&A. So we'll finish at 9. And as questions come up in your mind as you listen to the speakers, do jot them down or put them on chat as suggested, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Now, our first politician is represented, I've gone straight to Alison's queue because she's not here. So a long-standing MP next, who's represented the Wallasey constituency since April 1992. She's a member of the Treasury and Procedure Committees and the Joint Committee on Fixed Term Parliaments Act, previously Minister of State in the Department for Work and Pensions, Exchequer Secretary, Parliamentary Under Secretary in the Department of Social Security, and Parliamentary Under Secretary in the Department for the Environment, Transport and Regions. She's a busy woman. Welcome to Angela Eagle.
Well, Roger, thank you very much. I was exhausted listening to that, but fortunately I'm not. I'm not doing it all at once. I'd like to thank Wirral Climate Action Group, Rethink Now CIC, Wirral Environmental Network, Cllr, Wirral Partnership and Wirral Cllr for calling all of this together, eco-Wirral, I suppose, the forces that are coming together to try to do something about this existential threat to our planet. And I think it's interesting to note that at the moment we are 5 years on from that historic Paris climate agreement, and the last 5 years have been the hottest in history as far as we can tell. So those of us, those people out there who are still denying that climate change is an existential threat are really burying their heads in the sand. And what we need to understand is that the time for being able to avoid catastrophic climate change on our planet, runaway climate change, which will cause an existential threat to our entire ecosystem on a global basis, is fast running out. So it's funny that as a mixture, what needs to be done is very, very local things, very, very personal things, but also there needs to be massive global structural change in the way in which we run our economies, in the way in which we organize our lives, so that we can enable those parts of the world that haven't industrialized to at least grow their economies in much more sustainable ways. We need to have a completely different way of looking at economics, where we actually import the costs and the use of the resources that we use up just by living and count that. We need to make huge changes to ensure that our own societies are both socially and environmentally sustainable if we're going to look forward to reasonable prosperity in the future. That means a range of changes. And as I say, they range from personal choices such as cycling and walking more, not eating as much meat, trying to buy sustainably and look at supply chains and at the carbon costs of the things that we consume. But it also means governments getting together to organize how we're going to take that global warming gas out of the environment, how we're going to completely re-engineer huge systems we rely on. For example, our energy structures, how we have our energy, keep oil in the ground, start moving towards more sustainable levels of energy, types of energy such as tidal power in our own area, wind power, Some would say nuclear. I know that that is controversial with some people, but one of the doyens of climate change certainly thinks that nuclear power has a role to play. There are other things we need to do as well. We need to retrofit our own housing structures so that we can make housing give off much less greenhouse gases. We need huge tree planting, huge energy network change, cycling, walking. And one of the things that I try to do as a national politician in the UK Parliament is to keep an eye on what the government are doing, as well as help the Labour Party bring to bear its own plans for the future. So the Environment Bill is currently before Parliament, but we're also in a situation where things are changing structurally with Brexit. And so a lot of the rules and regulations for water purity, air purity, and all of those things that we've come to rely on are going to be potentially up for change because we've left the European Union, and we've got to make certain that we don't lower either environmental standards, food standards, or somehow think that we want to compete by being less globally aware about greenhouse gases and carbon, the carbon consequence of what we're doing. As we emerge from the COVID crisis, and that's not yet, we know that the re-engineering of our economy and building it back in a greener way is going to be very, very important, which is why the Labour Party published a £30 billion plan for doing that. The government, to be fair to them, have had good green rhetoric, but there's quite a big gap between the rhetoric and the reality, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit later on because I'm conscious I don't want to take so
I wanted to interrupt you, Angela, because you've done very well and covered for Alison.
Well, very good, and I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to be a part of this very good initiative. Thank you all of those who've organised it, and I'm looking forward to the questions when they come.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of them. Margaret Greenwood is a former teacher, community activist, founder member of Defend the NHS. She's represented Wirral West constituency since May 2015, was previously Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and then Shadow Schools Minister, but she resigned from that on principle. Margaret, welcome.
Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here this evening. And I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in organising today's event. And it's fantastic to see Roger chairing it because it's so timely. You know, we're in the grip of a climate crisis, but of course, our attention has been consumed with COVID for this year. But of course, we know that the clock is ticking over the climate crisis, and so it's important that we don't drop the ball on it. So next year, the UK will be hosting COP26, and I think that this gives us a real opportunity to campaign on action on climate change. As Angela referenced, Boris Johnson did come up with a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. We in the Labour Party felt that it wasn't ambitious enough in terms of investment in jobs, in terms of the amount of money being put into it, but also in terms of urgency. So our shadow-based secretary, Ed Miliband, had a call for a much more ambitious programme, and he put forward Labour's Green Economic Recovery. And this was calling for the government to bring forward £30 billion of capital investment over the next 18 months and invest in low carbon sectors as part of a rapid stimulus package to support 400,000 jobs. Now, you know, we know that we are facing real significant issues around unemployment. So, you know, we felt that it was very important that coming out of that the investment in creating new jobs should really focus on addressing climate change. So I think, you know, there's plenty more the government could be doing, but as Angela referenced, you know, I think that the whole climate issue is now very mainstream, and I'm just going to make some comments on that in a minute. My belief is that, as Angela said, we've got things to be done at different scales. So at the personal, at the local, at the national and the international. I think that grassroots campaigning is immensely important. I'm going to just give two examples, and I'm sure people will be familiar with them, but I think it's important to remind people of them. I was, for a period, before I joined Labour's front bench, I was a member of the Environmental Audit Committee. And during COP21, I went to a conference in Paris with about 140 legislators from around the world, coinciding with COP21, and heard their stories of what was being done at local level. That was one of the key messages that came out of it for me, that really the action that takes place locally has real impact. And I think the reason for that is that actually when you're acting locally, you are addressing practical, specific problems that you're very familiar, you know, that the local community is very familiar with and will come up with solutions for. And then that has a ripple effect in terms of informing wider communities. So that was the very powerful message that came out of that for me. So locally, I'm going to talk about the UCG campaign in the Dee estuary. So people will probably be aware that in 2013, the government granted a licence for drilling for coal gas in the Dee estuary. Now, I was a Labour candidate then, I wasn't a Member of Parliament then, but we started a campaign against that. And I was thrilled at the way that campaign went, because actually it brought together people from right across the political spectrum. People were very aware that this was impacting on the local place, you know, so the Dee estuary, which has got such fabulous bird life and so important for marine life and the ecology of the whole area. So I was really thrilled because people got very much involved and very much behind it. And that was a successful campaign. The company that had the license actually hasn't pursued it, and I think it's given the license back. That's not quite the term for it, but they no longer have that license. So that was a very real achievement that came out of local activists getting together and saying, oh, they're doing this here, let's do something about it. Similarly, when you look at the campaigning against fracking, I think it has been such an amazing success, because it's not very long ago that, you know, government ministers were absolutely promoting fracking. But earlier this year, the responsible minister actually said that based on current evidence, fracking will not be taken forward in England, nor is it likely that it will ever be taken up again unless there is compelling new evidence. Now, I think that actually that major success has really happened because of everybody who took part in the anti-fracking campaigns. I visited some of those campaigners, the ones at Upton in Cheshire, and there were lots of people from Wirral heavily involved in that campaign. And then the Preston New Road campaign outside Blackpool. And I think it was the sheer determination of local activists to campaign to save their area, but to really master a huge amount of technical information around, you know, what this actually meant, and to communicate that in a way that was very accessible to people in a very short space of time. I think it was actually a phenomenal achievement. And the fact that we now have, you know, the government saying that that's not going to happen, you know, I just want to pay tribute to everyone who was involved in that campaign. And I think that when those campaigns happen, and that's why an event like this evening is so important, I think, it is very important that elected representatives communicate with and go and find out and listen to those people who are doing that campaigning, because it is very important that, you know, what happens in Westminster is informed by what is happening around the country. I think that was an incredibly impressive campaign. Can
I just interrupt you, Margaret?
Yes.
It's a good point you make. By the way, we are going to get our third MP. She thought it was a 7:30 start, but she'll join us in a bit. But if you could conclude.
I'll conclude very swiftly, thank you. I think we're at a place where actually climate change in the environment now is in a far higher profile than it's previously been in our politics. And I do think that is down to the power of grassroots campaigning, but also the extreme urgency of the issue.
Thanks a lot for that, Mark. We'll hear more from you later, and indeed from Angela when the questions come, I know that. Now then, for his 5 minutes on Wirral climate change strategy, someone many years ago was an energy efficiency officer at a local council. He champions reducing carbon emissions, is an ambassador for targeting energy efficiency in vulnerable households at local and national level, the chief executive of Energy Projects Plus and chair of the Cool Wirral Partnership, Peter Owen. Peter.
Thanks, Roger. I confess I didn't recognise myself when you first started that. Okay, so Cool 2. It's a strategy that builds on the first Cool strategy from 2014 to 19. It had public consultation during 2019 and was launched a year ago, almost to the day. So happy birthday, Cool. It uses evidence and calculations from the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change local carbon budget tool. And what that says is that historically, for the past 10 years, Wirral have actually had CO2 emissions falling by an average of 3.8% a year. But if we want to achieve net zero carbon by 2041 and stay within our fair share carbon budget of 7.7 million tonnes of CO2, we actually need a decrease of 13.8%, which is 3.5 times more than what we're currently doing. When you read the Cllr strategy, you'll see there's a graph in there which shows the current trajectory against what the Tyndall figures do. But what I would draw people's attention to, don't get hung up on the start and the end point. It's actually the journey that's important, because for every occasion that we're above the line of Tyndall's figure, that means we're actually taking away from our carbon budget and actually putting it back on the future generations to make up the difference. I would suggest that is that really a fair question, a fair onus to put on our future generations? So what is Cllr? Well, what is it not? It is a strategy and lays out the evidence and the joint goals of staying within our carbon budget, 7.7 million, but also ensuring that Wirral is climate resilient. It needs to adapt and cope with the inevitable change, as was mentioned earlier by the MPs. There will be change irrespective of what we do in the future. But it sets a direction we need to travel over the next decades. It's an evolving strategy. It needs more work and wider support, but it's not a fixed action plan. It's being produced specifically to enable people and encourage people to develop their own plans and encourage collaboration and information sharing. It's identified steps, early steps to take going forward. And Annie is going to be talking about some of those, our cool family, as we call it. So we look forward to hearing that. But it's an invitation to everybody to get involved. I'll paste, or if anybody else wants to do it for me, paste the link to the Cllr 2 strategy. And I encourage everybody to have a read. It's designed to be sort of accessible and readable, not just for those of us who are heavily involved. It actually should be accessible to the general public as well. As I said, it offers a direction of travel against the key objectives, but it's not prescriptive. We're all full of ideas and ingenuity. We want to harness the ideas and ingenuity, not stymie it. It's got a partnership group that meets quarterly to help drive it forward, to assess progress and identify new opportunities. And I thought it'd be useful just to name who those partners are. We've got sort of statutory government NHS partners, so Wirral Council, officers and members. We've got the Recycling Waste Authority, Mersey Travel, Merseyside Police, Merseyside Fire and Rescue, the University Teaching Hospital, DWP. We've also got the Liverpool City Regions Combined Authority and also the Northwest Energy Hub, and we'll be hearing from James as well a bit later. Businesses are representative through the Wirral Chamber of Commerce and also Peel Land and Property, and we'll be hearing from Joe a bit later. Housing providers represented, Magenta, the major social housing provider, and Forum Housing, plus also community representation. The charity I work for, Energy Projects Plus, Wirral Environmental Network, who've been heavily involved in arranging this evening. Faith for Change, and as I mentioned, we'll hear from Annie shortly. Planet Heswell, Transition West Kirby, Community Action Wirral to get to that broader community sector. But equally importantly, we've got younger people's representation as well, through the Pioneers of Sustainable Hope, POSH ambassadors. This brings a sort of a knowledge and expertise to the Cllr strategy, but most importantly, it brings reach. Each member is charged with sharing the knowledge and promoting Cllr across the networks and gives the opportunity for wider feedback from the community. I think I just thought I'd do a quick reflection on year one of the strategy.
Very quick, if you would.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, this is my closing bit. I feel COVID has left us treading water a little as planned capacity across all sectors has been redirected. But in spite of that, things are happening. And this evening is a great example. Individuals and organisations have made progress. People and organisations are reaffirming their commitment to act. And government has made pledges, though we'd like more. And our priority for early 21 is to nail down the most effective way to capture and measure the value of the climate actions, because as soon as we can measure it and report it, we can share it and then maximise the publicity of the positive actions, continue to drive, make climate action a normal thing to do and something to share. Thanks very much.
Cracking, Peter. 5 minutes exactly. Well done. You do the same, Annie.
Yes,
You'll be following. No, you're not next. Sorry, I just see you next on my screen. No, next to speak for 5 minutes on Wirral Council Climate Action, what the council has done, what it's going to do, and what it will do. Someone involved in a host of organisations like Flood and Coastal Risk Management and Inshore Fisheries and Conservation. The chair of Wirral's Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee, Councillor Elizabeth Gray. Liz, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Roger. And thank you, everybody. And thanks for organising this. It's a really, really important event. And it's really, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to be able to just highlight some of the things that Wirral Council is doing. I'm going to try and share my screen. So, sorry, apologies. I've got a slideshow. It's only a few slides just to, let's see. Ed, I should have got you to do this, shouldn't I?
Can you do it, Ed?
No, I think I've got there now.
Okay.
Just takes a while because I've just got a little.
Ah, yes.
Can you see it?
Not
Right.
yet, but you have started screen sharing, it says. Yep,
Yeah,
well
thanks.
done, it's there.
Okay, so here we go. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, it's fine. If you could widen it, that's it. It's there now.
Yeah, okay. There's a delay, so I've just realised there's a lag between what's happening on my screen and what you can see. So Wirral Council declared an environment and climate emergency in July 2019. And the environment part is an acknowledgement of the biodiversity crisis, the extinction crisis, that's happening all around us. And by declaring these emergencies, we were acknowledging the emergencies, but we're also acknowledging our duty to act. So since that point, since July 2019, we have been creating and acting on our action plan. It's sort of a live document. We all refer to it in every part of the council, and it's constantly evolving. There's going to be a streamlined version of it published in early 2021, but it's important to acknowledge that we have been working from it and with it right from the start, right from the declaration of an emergency in 2019. So it's got, as far as I'm describing it now, it's got 3 strands to it. So I'll start with the biodiversity strand, and it's about. Can you see? Yeah. Can you actually see the full slide there?
Yeah, we can see the list and a nice picture of the beach.
Okay, good. So it's about protection and restoration. The biodiversity strand fits with the climate emergency because obviously almost everything we do for biodiversity has a carbon impact as well, a greenhouse gas emission impact. So it's about protecting and restoring biodiversity as much as we can. So we've launched last year a tree, woodland and hedgerow strategy that we worked with the Wirral Initiative on Trees, and we worked with a number of different organisations, including Friends of the Earth, on our tree strategy. And that has a pledge to more than double our tree cover by 2030. So to do that, we'll need to plant at least 21,000 trees every year. And that's actually a big ask because we need land and we need money to do that, and we certainly don't have the money to do it, so we have to bid for funding for everything that we do. We've managed to do it. We've managed to exceed our 21,000 for the first year, so we are on target. Even though it's really ambitious, we are on target for doing that. But the tree strategy isn't just about planting, because we obviously have to preserve our existing tree stock, and so we've invested in more officers in the tree team. We've invested in the latest technology so that we're not just diagnosing rot in trees and then felling. From now on, we'll be able to see whether the trees can actually be saved, whether they might have rot, but they're safe to keep for another few decades. So we're looking to minimise any works that we do on our existing tree stock, because we know that the saplings don't store carbon or provide habitats for years to come, really. We also launched a pollinators plan, which means that Wirral has a whole raft of policies aimed at attracting pollinators and looking after the pollinators that we know are absolutely decimated across the country. So it's sort of been put on hold a little bit because of COVID, but it's all up and running for next year. We've got lots of plans for, and we've already started planting RHS approved plants bulbs, sowing seeds across roundabouts, grass verges, and across sections of all our open spaces. And that's going to be really attractive as well. It's going to be quite colourful and attractive, but its main aim is to improve things for biodiversity. We've got to protect our SSSIs. We know that our SSSIs, our sites of special scientific interest, are they're unfavourable, many of them, and Natural England have said that they need to improve. We've set an ambition to get them to favourable, which is really quite a considerable ask, and it means we need to treat our designated sites quite differently from how we've been treating them. We are improving the number of green flags that we get for our parks. Every year we get more green flags. Again, we have to work with nature to do that. So we've had to reduce quite considerably the amount of pesticides that we use. We've voted to phase out glyphosate. We've halved the amount of glyphosate that we're using in the last year, with an aim to get rid of it completely. We don't use it at all now in our parks. That's why we're getting more green flags. We're aiming to get blue flags on our beaches. Again, that means treating our beaches very differently from how we have been treating them. We noticed it was our policy towards rewilding and allowing some of our open spaces to be manicured a lot less, basically, was fast-tracked because of COVID. So a lot of the grass verges were allowed to grow long. It wasn't deliberate in many cases, but it proved to be very popular. So we've now learned that we can have, long grass, and sometimes it's controversial, but sometimes it's very popular. So okay, I'm going to go ahead. There's 3 strands to this action plan. So we've got the biodiversity strand. We've got we've got the transport strand. So very quickly, that involves a modal shift from fossil fueled cars to people using public transport more and people using bikes and walking more. And this again is potentially very controversial because people don't want to be encouraged out of their cars, and it's easy for ill-intentioned politicians to hijack this one and act as though they're saving people from any efforts to get them out of their car. But for their own health and for clean air and to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we really do need to reduce the amount of driving that we do. So much of our driving is unnecessary. It's short distance, it's local. Most of us could walk those journeys, cycle, no problem at all. And we're increasingly, especially in the last decade, we have really increased the amount of short journeys that we're driving, and that's got to change.
I really need to move you on. We'll have no time for questions later on.
Okay. So the last bit is about energy use and waste management and recycling. We're working with lots of organisations, including some of the really brilliant people who are here and organising this event, to increase our upcycling, our recycling, reduce all the waste that's coming out of this authority. And that's it.
Okay, thanks a lot. But I'm sure there's plenty there that people will ask you about as we move on. If you want to unlock your screen, whatever you do, that's it, yeah. Our next speaker is called her 5-minute talk, Cool Wirral Family. We heard a bit about it from Peter. It's about what businesses, schools, communities and faiths are doing. She's the CEO of Faith for Change, which is a Merseyside environmental charity rooted in the values and beliefs that are shared across all faiths and communities. Annie Merry, over to you.
Hi, good evening everyone. Just to advise that I'm sharing the latter part of my presentation with Akhila Fayaz from Wirral Deen Centre, who's also here. So I'll crack on. The Cool family, as Peter mentioned earlier, are a group of related climate action strands set out in Call 2, the Wirral Climate Change Strategy, and they're being delivered by organisations in partnership and individually as part of the work of the Cool Wirral Partnership. Our family are cool homes, schools, communities and place-based businesses and faith communities, led principally by Energy Projects Plus, the Eco Schools Advisor, Wirral Environmental Network, Planet Heswell, Wirral Chamber of Commerce and Faiths for Change. Although individual organisations, our approaches have much in common: listening, sharing, educating, learning, providing advice, and crucially, working with people to consider how our support can best help to raise awareness and inspire action to reduce our carbon footprints and increase local resilience to the impacts of climate change. Cool Family work began early this year and the whole family has lots planned for 2021. So please know that this is just the beginning. As with most engagement, the pandemic has meant that some of our work, such as the planned Cool Homes programme, has been put back to 2021. That will feature kind of volunteer-led approaches, sharing on social media. So that's soon to start. Other work has been moved online and has continued, and that's included the Cool Communities and the Cool Places of Worship strands. So Cool Communities workshops, some of you may have attended or be looking to in the very near future, have been really good fun and interactive, using games, quizzes and discussions about what climate emergency means for Wirral and the people, the residents of Wirral. Workshops have helped people to assess their climate impact and plan their journeys to zero carbon lives, including changes including introducing vegetarian and vegan meal options at community cafes, setting up a new group, Zero Carbon Bevington, and much more. Faiths for Change has worked with places of worship to embed and encourage the take-up of practical climate actions through their communications, in buildings to strengthen their journeys to achieve environmental awards, engaging with climate leads from the local councils, including Liverpool as well as Wirral, to bring people together to share and to engage youth groups. We've worked with West Kirby, United Reformed Church, Christchurch Higher Bebington, Holy Apostles and Martyrs in Wallasey Village, and the Wirral Deen Centre in Birkenhead. So I'll now hand over to Akhila from Wirral Deen Centre, and she'll tell you a little bit about our work together. Thank you.
Hello, yes, my name's Akhila. Thank you so much for having me. Annie approached me probably in about August or July possibly, about how to work with our Wirral Deen Centre, with our actual scout group, which is the Birkenhead Ansar Scouts. So we're relatively new, and amidst all the chaos with the COVID, we didn't actually know where we were standing. So when Annie came and approached us about her project and what she was doing, it was really, really exciting. One, because we didn't have to plan so much, and two, because we had this incredibly enthusiastic person, Annie, sort of telling us, or explaining to us how she could help us. So it was really, really good. From our point of view, we're a small ethnic minority based scout group in the midst of Wirral, and for our actual scouts to actually see how climate and how the climate affects them was really, really positive, because I don't think the people who we have, the scouts that we do have, they don't really see that in that light. So it was a really nice opportunity for them to see how climate change or the recycling and how that really impacts on their environment. And for Annie to sort of go to great lengths to actually find certain individuals to actually sort of talk to them about their own faith and how that relates to climate change was really, really positive. The actual scouts themselves, we were joined by, because of the numbers, we actually also joined by Toxta Salam, another, obviously an area with a lot of deprivation, and so those scouts themselves, coming from a lot of ethnic minorities, also had the opportunity to talk about that climate. And I think that was really important, because I don't think a lot of the ethnic minority scouts themselves never really actually link the two together. And actually sometimes when they do view climate and waste and things, where they're coming from, it's seen quite negatively. So it was a real nice opportunity for them to see something positively take place, what they can do, and a really important opportunity to discuss. They had a lot of enjoyment actually discussing climate and talking through the points with Annie and the various guests that we had to lead on in those sessions. So thank you very much.
Thanks both Annie and Akhila, and thanks to Alison, who has, I think, joined us. Hi Alison. You've got only a couple of minutes, I'm afraid, because we are running a bit late. But just to sort of your view on this, your position on this.
Thanks, Roger, and my apologies for being late and for missing the presentations. But it was very, very good to hear what Liz had to say, and Annie and Akhila. For those that don't know, I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Wirral South. And I've been talking to constituents about climate change and environmental issues for the 10 years in which I've been elected. I just will very, very briefly highlight two important things to me that I and Angela and Margaret and other parliamentary colleagues have been working on recently, and apologies if this is repeating anything that anybody has already said, but it's obviously very important that we get investment in the UK at the moment, particularly given what's happening with Brexit and to rebuild following the COVID pandemic. And that's why we need to see much more investment in green energy. And there's two projects that I think in Merseyside that we should be pushing forward on. The tidal barrage project to create greener energy, which I'm sure most people will know about, which, you know, council leaders and other colleagues have been lobbying government to invest in Merseyside. And also a particular project that's very important for our future, and particularly in my case representing Port Sunlight, which is a proposal to have a research centre to investigate new forms of packaging, to see if we could create at the Unilever site in Port Sunlight some new forms of environmentally neutral packaging, which might sound like nothing, but if you imagine that the amount of packaging in the world, if we could make that have less of an impact on the environment, that is a great change that we could bring forward for the whole world, and we could do it from the Wirral. So that's something that I'm working with Unilever and others on. And secondly, we had a very important moment, I think, recently in Parliament. We had a pensions bill. Now, pensions is probably not the most exciting area of public policy to many people, although I shouldn't say that with Angela on the call as a former pensions minister. But we sought to amend the pensions bill to require all companies to report on their climate impact. And this is the future, I think, because whilst governments will spend money trying to tackle climate change, we need every company in the world to change the way it invests, change the approach it takes to its processes to make sure that they are carbon neutral. So we want to use legislation to try and bring that about. So just two really practical things, the investments we're campaigning for and the changes to the law, that I think shows that, you know, whoever we are, whether it's making a change in our daily lives or whether we can do it through legislation or through investment, I think that we can, from the Wirral, bring a change on the environment.
Thanks a lot, Alison. And now we go to a serial entrepreneur, founder of Changing Streams, which is a not-for-profit organisation which has some intention of processing change and eliminating the use of plastics in industry. In the past, he built a multi-million-pound fixing business, for which he was recognised as Liverpool's Enterprise Champion in 2004, and he was one of the North West Insider's 42 under 42 young entrepreneurs to watch for the future. Well, we're going to listen to him for the future now to speak on eliminating plastic at source. Brendon Kenny. Brendon.
Thank you very much, Roger. I've only got about 37 slides, so I'll be as quick as you can. Hi, so I'm Brendon Kenny. Let's hope that starts. I'm the co-founder of Changing Streams. I suppose that the talk about the reason why I got involved with Changing Streams is when I was building the fixings business, I pioneered pre-packed nails. So I took nails out of cardboard boxes and put them into heavy gauge plastic bags. I put millions and millions and millions of them into the environment without knowing the consequences of why and the impact that was having. I then, when I finished that, I worked with a company who most of you'll know, which is Respiratory, and I helped to develop that business to make that successful, which it's now very successful in Wallasey on the Dock Road. So that's basically the reason why I do what I do. Neil Maxwell, who founded the organisation, he went on a trip to the Arctic for his 60th birthday, and he came face to face with the impacts of climate change and also the damage which we're doing to the environment in terms of the plastic pollution. And when he came back, he decided he was going to dedicate his life to researching oceanography with Liverpool University. And he met with a Professor Jonathan Charples, who talked him out of doing that and said, use your position as a contractor, because he's got a contract company, to make an impact in industry by utilising your organisation as the vehicle. So he approached me, we're long-standing friends, and he said, will you get involved in this, Brendon? And of course, once he said, I jumped at it, and we've been 2 years developing this. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to design out and reduce plastic in the construction sector first, but then across the wider industry. we're fully committed to linking or helping people to educate the link between plastic and carbon. So give you an example, high level figures. For every 1 kilo of plastic we produce equates to about 3 kilos of carbon. So we can't solve the climate crisis unless we solve the plastic pandemic, because they're absolutely interlinked. So I'm going to move along quite quickly. I'm not going to read through the slides, but the audience, if you have a look at that, we're literally flooding the ocean with waste plastics and damage. And as that plastic goes into the ocean, it breaks down to nanoplastics, microplastics, and then what happens then is the ocean spits it back out to us when the tide comes in and throws it back into the air, and we start to breathe it in and we start to eat it. Now, we believe that plastic is the new asbestos. And we say that because we've got no knowledge properly yet, or there's lots of research going on about what the impact of nanoplastics and microplastics are having when we consume them, when they penetrate our cells and organisms, not just us, but the whole ecosystem. So we don't want to wait until the damage is absolutely proven. We want to turn the tap down now. And the way we do that is we've created a charter. And sorry, I'll just talk a little bit about the problem in construction. In most buildings, apart from heritage buildings, you will find plastic everywhere. You'll find plastic in your piping, you'll find plastic on the wall, you've got plastic in the paint, you've got plastic in the floor, you've got plastic in the kitchen. You can't avoid plastic. So what we want to do is we want to work with industry, both from top down, which is working with the policymakers, so working with government, working with the local authorities, to get them to embed our charter for reduction of plastic in the building control, so building regs, in the products, etc., etc. So drive that change down from the top. Also work with the pension funds, because they're the building owners, and get them to specify the reduction of plastics in how they procure refurbishments and how they procure new building. So we've got that top-down approach. Then bottom up, we want to work with architects, specifiers, everyone involved in the built environment, which involves us all, and get them to look at alternatives, make that conscious decision to choose a plastic-free alternative. So what we have to do is we've got to probably go back to pre-plastic. So 70 years ago, we've only had plastic as a tool for the last 70 years. So we go back to how we used to build buildings, and how would we have evolved products? And this is working with the university. How would we evolve those products if plastic wasn't a choice? So how would we innovate? How would we upwardly innovate, given that choice? So that's why Changing Streams sits between the University of Liverpool and industry. We're the bridge. So we engage with the industries. We're working with Your Housing Group as an example. They're working on they've become a member of ours, and they've got a £600 million build for housing, social housing over the next 3 to 5 years. We're working with them to embed the charter in the PQQs, and sorry, I won't talk jargon, into the documents basically, to make sure that any contractors on a level playing field who wants to work with them has to drive down the plastic use within the product which they build. So it really is about behaviour change, and then pushing that through the supply chain. Because once we get the main contractor on from the building owner, in this case the housing association, we push that all the way through supply chain. So we get the supply chain innovating, and that then pushes it forward. And the reason why we do it this way is because of what I learned when I was working with Recipro. Trying to get Recipro to get the change in the industry, it took us a long time. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But once I realised that if I went to the customers, in this case it was Marks and Spencer's, and got them to understand if they changed their policies, they would push that to their contractors, and then they would be forced to reuse the surplus material, which is what Recipro was all about.
Brendon, I need to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but do you want to conclude as briefly as you can?
I will conclude, sorry, I can talk for hours.
I know.
So, emissions, I don't know whether you can see the slide there completely clearly, but like I say, the plastic production is only growing. it's going to double by 2040 unless we take action, or triple by 2050. It's absolutely intrinsically linked with the climate crisis, and we can't tackle the climate crisis alone unless we tackle the plastic pandemic. And I was going to talk about what we eat a week, so if you just have a look at that slide.
They get a chance with the Q&As that are coming up. Could you unlock your screen or whatever it is?
I will do it now.
Okay.
There we go.
Now I've managed to lose my thing. I don't know how, but anyhow, as long as you can still see and hear me, that's all that matters. A medic next, the clinical lead for respiratory medicine at Wirral University Trust Hospitals. Brought up and educated in the Wirral, went to Liverpool University, worked to Merseyside for his whole career. Primary focus on the management of airways disease, such as asthma and COPD. He's the lead for Wirral's community respiratory services and is passionate about reducing health inequalities across Wirral. Inequalities will only be made worse by the impending climate crisis. To speak on the impact of climate change on health and on what can be done, consultant in respiratory health, David Tarpey. David?
Hi, I'm just going to try and can everyone hear me okay? It didn't seem to I was trying to share a presentation, but I might skip it off.
I've got it, David, to hand. Do you want me to share it?
Yeah, could you put it on? Is that all right?
Yeah, just tell me when you need me to move on to the next slide.
Well, I get to play a bit in Chris Whitty then.
That's marvellous. Right, there we go.
So what I've got there is there was like I said, I'm David Tarp. I'm one of the respiratory consultants at Wirral Park, and I'm our clinical lead for respiratory medicine, and I also have a big interest in community medicine as well. There was an RCP report in 2016, a Royal College of Physicians, that was titled "Every Breath We Take," which is quite a common cause, quite a common title for any respiratory document released by the RCP. And there's a picture of Sting there in the Amazon singing away. So what I want to talk about is the effects of the climate change that will have on our health. So if we go to the next slide. So the extrinsic temperature in the environment affects our health directly. The 2003 heat wave caused an estimated 2,000 excess deaths in England and Wales. But the converse is true, and it's always important with climate change, is that we're going to see more extreme weather events as time goes on. So not only will we see heat waves, but we'll also see profound cold areas as well. And we know that on it, well-established evidence that for every degree drop in temperature below 5 degrees, there's a 10% increase in people going to see their GP, and about a 1% increase in people coming to hospital. And overall, any patient with respiratory disease will see about a 10% increase in the risk of dying over 3 months every time the temperature drops by 1 degree below 5 degrees C. So we know the temperature affects our health absolutely directly, but there's also indirect effects as well. So we get novel pathogens. So malaria used to be seen in the UK in Roman times, and now the mosquito that carries the malarial parasite has been found in Northern Europe and potentially could come here, bringing malaria and dengue. COVID, which has occupied most of my last 9 months of my professional life, you could argue that's associated with climate change, and certainly with the deforestation, the changes in land use that's happened in the Far East. And more zoonotic diseases such as that are likely to become a problem. There's also a chance of a re-emergence of old diseases, such as TB. Sorry, my dog's just come in. Such as TB, as populations change and more people move around the world. We know that increased pollen counts seen with climate change affect asthmatics disproportionately, and flooding. So about 7% of our hospitals are on floodplains, but there's a 2 to 3 increase in significant mental health problems in patients and people who are flooded. And obviously it affects our food supply going forward. What interests me most as a respiratory physician is air pollution. So it's implicating about 40,000 deaths per year. And there's demonstrable effects from prenatally to old age and to people in their 80s and 90s. This is disproportionately worse in poor areas for a whole load of factors. And it's due to a mixture of particulate matter, which are small particles of carbon, nitrous oxide and carbon monoxide in the environment. And there's good studies from other parts of the world that have shown that the more trees you have in an area, the less mortality from respiratory disease you see. So you go to the next one. If you go to the next slide, please. Sorry, the NHS amazingly causes about a quarter of all public sector carbon emissions. 16% of that is staff and patient travel, and 65% is due to procurement of pharmaceuticals. In September 2020, the Royal College again released a document on how we get the NHS to net zero by 2040, which is probably too late. But what we can do, so I was asked to focus on things that we could do. So one more thing, we plant more trees in everywhere that we possibly can, and it was good to see the council talk about that. There was a 2015 paper in Canada that showed that areas with more trees had less respiratory disease. Now, there's lots of confounding factors with that, but undoubtedly, you don't do any harm by planting more trees. I find there's lots of wasted NHS real estate as I go around that we could plant with trees, we could have as wildflower meadows, that would actually be cheaper to maintain than the current way we do it. So we can make better procurement decisions as well. And I'm going to talk about that one of my next slides there. Also encouraging sustainable transport. I know we don't have any electricity points or anything like that at Arrow Park. Some of the hospitals do, but we need to encourage that more and encourage the take up of electric charging points for cars. So the big focus of this is one example that we could all do that would make a difference. So if we go to the next slide, one thing I can do as a doctor is prescribe you an inhaler that's the most carbon neutral. So amazingly, inhalers, these particularly type called metered dose inhalers, which are the ones that spray out, they contribute 3.5% of the NHS total emissions, which is about 800,000 return flights to New York. If we switch all these to the dry powder inhalers, they have a significantly less carbon footprint, just 5%. So when I'm talking to my patient, I'm talking to the respiratory nurse, we start people on inhalers, I always try to use the DPIs, and I've tried to drive that through the respiratory group to try to use these more and more. There's no difference in efficacy amongst them. They just have a reduced carbon footprint. And then, so that's for me to do as the prescribing doctor. But if you go to the next slide, this is what you can do. So about 17 million inhalers are used in the UK, which is a staggering large amount. They are full of high quality plastics and high quality metal. If you put them in the normal bin, they can't be cleaned. They can't be recycled, and they'll just be going to landfill. There's various schemes run by pharmaceutical companies that are actually looking to recycle these inhalers. And last year, and this is 2 years ago now, so this is 3 years ago, that 5,000 annual cars worth of carbon dioxide emissions were saved by recycling over 1 million inhalers. So we can all make a difference. So in the Wirral, we can drop them off in pharmacies or in outpatients or pulmonary rehab. That's all changed a little bit with COVID. Because we don't have the same ability to do that because of the infection control alongside COVID. But lastly, the one thing I want to say that I forgot to put in the slides as well is that a fringe benefit of COVID is that we've reduced the amount of outpatient appointments people are attending. We're doing much more virtual work and telephones. So that will hopefully reduce the NHS's carbon footprint and try and get us near that net zero by 2040. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David. If you can undo your thanks, lovely. Next speaker is an art professional and thought leader, she described us, in mental health. She presented the BBC One BAFTA nominated and winner of Mind Media Award for Best Factual TV Documentary, Life After Suicide. It's a film that encouraged discussion and exploration of mental health issues, challenging the stigma of suicide. She's a director of Grow Wellbeing, and that's a community interest company which works with all kinds of young people in all settings to provide programs of outdoor learning. She's an advocate for early intervention in health and wellbeing practice. Her charity work and the making of the documentary was recognised when she was named as the Merseyside Woman of the Year 2016 and awarded an honorary fellowship by Liverpool John Moores University. To speak on green spaces and mental health, Angela Samata. Angela.
Roger, what an introduction. Gee whiz, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Hardly recognise myself. Thank you. Yeah, so as Roger said, I've worked in the arts and mental health and the media for a long time now, and I've definitely swapped my Jimmy Choos for wellies in the last 9 months. It's 2 years since Dwayne Chong and I founded Grow Wellbeing, and we both felt that his experience as an early years practitioner and my experience as somebody who's worked in mental health, specifically suicide prevention, for 20 years almost, it just felt like the right thing to do. So we took the plunge and we set up Grow Wellbeing. And we have several people working with us who are therapeutic forest school practitioners, but we also have an associate model. So we work with lots of different people with lots of different skills. We work right across the Northwest now, and we have a range of things that we deliver, including Women's Wellbeing Days. We have sessions that we deliver with kinship carers who are often grandparents who are caring for their grandchildren. We've done pilot sessions with the men from the YMCA, and who says men don't talk? You know, as soon as you light a fire, you can't stop them talking. So we've done work with the men's group at the YMCA, and we've also worked with Wirral CAMS. We've worked with Bernardo's young carers, and they can be, you know, children who are sometimes around the age of 5 who are primary carers in their family, and we bring them into the forest and they have fun and they play. And it's really about allowing them to be children. We also deliver a series of sessions in schools and nurseries across the Northwest. And we do a series of public sessions. And the image that you can see here is from one of our public sessions. All the public sessions that we do take place in woodland that is on Bidston Hill, which is right next to Tam O'Shanter's farm. So we're in the middle of the north end of Birkenhead. But we have people bringing their children from as far, far away as the kind of north side of Liverpool that come drive over to Bidston Hill and come to Forest School there. We have kindergarten sessions where children from naught, we literally have newborns coming in their slings. From 0 to 5, they come along with their parents and carers. And we also have woodland explorer sessions, which we work with children who are from 5 to 14. And they definitely like to leave their adults at the edge of the camp. So definitely don't want their parents and carers coming in. Our mission statement is summed up by this picture. These are 2 sisters here who have been coming to Forest School for a long time. And I think the smallest one, the first time she came, she was in a carrier. And this kind of sums up our ethos, really. It's about our work centres around Forest School, creativity and curiosity, joy, and really having fun while learning about the natural environment. And addressing the growing nature deficit that lots of people are experiencing. We have an active commitment to diversity. I have Greek and Italian heritage, and Dwayne has Chinese heritage. So we're definitely actively committed to diversity. And we're also interested in intergenerational cooperation as well. So we have lots of grandparents who come along as well. Our ethos around climate change is that we believe that it just can't be left to local authorities. And with the greatest will in the world, we believe that we all have individual agency. And we try and create that ethos and pass that ethos on to the children that we're working with. So we talk about habitat destruction, and the children take ownership of the site, and they often talk about what happens when we overuse an area, why we have to rest an area, why we don't cut trees down even when they're in our way, even when we want to have fun in that area. And these are all discussions that go on. So we're kind of introducing ideas around climate kind of by stealth, really, while they're playing. Public Health England's 2020 Green Space report said that from the moment we're born through to old age, the environments we live in shape our lives and well-being. And again, that really is part of our ethos. And research suggests that the impact of green spaces throughout childhood is significant, and exposure to green spaces is comparable with family history as a predictor of mental health outcomes for our children. A child spent close to knit green space is a really important factor in mental health outcomes, such as their restoration of physical health, their restoration of psychological health and resilience. And green spaces do provide respite for overstimulated young minds and older minds. We've all sat in front of our computers far too much during lockdown. It's reported that children experience around a 55% lower risk in poor mental health outcomes in adulthood if they have regular exposure to green spaces. And it looks as if the strongest protections are against things like mood disorders, depression, and stress-related issues later in life. After lockdown, we reopened, and I and other people that work with us observed anxiety behaviour in toddlers who were as young as 2.5. And I think the reason for that was that we talked to their parents and reassured them, and talked about the fact that these children who are now coming to Forest School, the children you see in front of you here, have spent a quarter of their life in lockdown. And when they come onto site, the anxiety behaviour is that they don't want to be out of, they want to know exactly where the hand sanitizer is. We have to strap it to trees at the moment. And they want to know exactly where their parents are at all times. By the end of the session, they come on displaying these behaviours. But by the end of the session, they are making leaf soup in the mud kitchen and not worrying about germs. So that's a wonderful kind of effect of forest school. But we also know that green spaces are dose dependent, and it does depend on how often we can bring our children and young people into green spaces. And to that end, we have just launched yesterday, actually, we've just launched our Act of Kindness campaign, where people who want to support Forest School and want to ensure children have access to green spaces can pay it forward. And so far, I've just checked, and we've had 20 sessions donated by members of the public. They've paid it forward to ensure that we can pass on those free sessions to through the Green Social Prescribing Network, and we'll pass them on to families that need it.
Angela, I need to interrupt you.
Yeah,
you could conclude.
I've finished. That's it. That's what we do. Grow wellbeing, and that's the ethos that we have.
That's good news. Thanks very much indeed for that. Our penultimate speaker is a member of the Peel Land and Property Senior Leadership Team. Actually helped Peel publish its first sustainability business plan, as well as advising on placemaking and future-proofing activities. She's been a mentor at the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment for 12 years to want to help other people further their environmental career. To discuss reducing carbon and increasing biodiversity in development, the Sustainability Director of Peel Land and Property, Jo Holden. Jo?
Thanks, Roger. Thanks for inviting me along tonight. Hi, everybody. Great turnout, fantastic for a Friday night. I've got a few pictures to share with you, so I'll do that very quickly because I don't want to be told off by Roger, that's for sure. So I can just maximise that there. Yes, here we go. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the actions that we're taking to help Wirral and the environmental and climate emergency. And what we've done is roll this into our 5-year plan, and you can see we've actually put a picture of Wirral Waters on the front there of our 5-year plan, because we feel that really represents the opportunities in terms of regenerating an area such as Birkenhead and Wirral Waters, and how we can make that a really sustainable regeneration project as well. Our 5-year plan is led by the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we've had a look at all of those 17 goals, and we found that these 4 here are the 4 that really sort of resonate well with our business. So we've formed our commitments in our 5-year plan around these 4 goals that you can see here. So, you know, in terms of continually improving the sustainability of our estate, and then, you know, when we're building new sustainable communities, looking at how we can embed low carbon energy and transport, etc. Always looking out for the sustainable options of providing decent work and economic growth through apprenticeships, and how we can encourage more jobs to the area. And then the number 15 is life on land, which is very much about recognising the importance of biodiversity in the prosperity of a region, and how that's so sort of inherently linked to everybody's health and well-being. So we've learned quite a lot about how to reduce our carbon over the last few years. And we're really looking forward to sort of being able to apply that when we're helping to build the communities in and around Wirral Waters. So this year we've actually verified 17 of our buildings as net zero carbon, in line with the UK Green Building Council's definition. And late this year, this year, not got much of this year left. In the next 12 months, we're hoping to work with other experts to reduce our carbon further, such as the Zero Carbon Research Institute, which is based at the University of Liverpool, and looking at developments such as the picture here on the left, the Edgerton Village, which is going to be like a social and community hub, and looking at how we can make that building low carbon, looking at the embodied carbon in the building to make sure that the fabric of the building, as much as anything, is low carbon. I mean, along there on that picture, you can see you've got the Wirral Met College there, which last year won a Carbon Champion Award at the Echo Awards, which was fantastic news for them. And in the middle there, we've got an office development as well, which is looking to reduce its carbon. So it's about thinking about these things early on and then building it in. But I hope the other thing you can see from this picture is that we've got a lot of blue and green assets in there as well. And I like what I've been hearing from the other speakers about the links between health and well-being and people and the environment and green space. So what we're trying to do with Wirral Waters is build in a lot of green infrastructure and take advantage of any funding that we can get to make sure that there's really good green infrastructure in these developments. Lots of trees, lots of green areas, lots of green space for people to take advantage of. The great thing about Liverpool City Region is that through the Year of the Environment, there's a great piece of work by Nature Connected, which is the local nature partnership for the region, which has worked on this mapping of all the natural assets across Liverpool City Region. So you can see the Wirral there. You see they've mapped down to like 10 by 10 metre squares what the land use is. You can start to see where the green is and where you can enhance it, but also where there isn't enough green, so where we need to plant more trees, where we need to plant more hedgerows and bring the biodiversity back in. So I think that's a fantastic map, and this is quite pretty much leading stuff in the UK to be able to have maps at this level, to be able to understand what we've got. For a trees example, for example, we all wanted to plant more trees, and we all know the benefits to people and the environment of planting more trees, but it's very much about planting them in the right place as well. And so, for example, if we've got flooding issues, we know that trees can help with flooding issues. In socially deprived areas, we know how they have a fantastic effect on people's mental health and well-being. So this is a really great tool to be using in the Wirral. So
the time's nearly up, Joe, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's it from me. I just hope that's given you a bit of an overview of what we're doing at the moment.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Joe. Our final contributor is the head of the regional programme for the Department of Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy. It provides strategic advice and project development support to local government in the northwest of England. It's Local Energy Northwest Hub. It's hosted by the Growth Platform, overseen by Liverpool City Region Combined Authority and local enterprise partnerships in the northwest. Our contributor is a chartered building services engineer with a background in home energy performance and sustainable energy. Is currently working with local authorities to develop a programme of housing retrofit funded from Green Home Grant local authority delivery, which has been allocated to the Northwest via that energy hub. Here's James Johnson. James.
Thank you, Roger. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm going to be brief because I know people want to get onto the questions. So suffice to say, I'm a part of a programme that's funded by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, although I don't work for the government, but we're here to help local councils with energy projects. I think so much energy policy is waiting in the wings, piled up behind other government preoccupations. But when you sort of read the runes on it, it really does feel like we've got a step change coming in across energy and climate policy. And I think if you read the Committee on Climate Change report, which was published this week, you can't help but see we need a radical step in the next decade. I think that talks about a need for a 67% cut in emissions in the next decade. That will be on a 1990 baseline. And so at some point soon, we're not going to be able to defer hard decisions about delivering this. I think the report says government set out its plans and it's time to step up and deliver them. So I'm optimistic that a lot of the thinking's been done that could see a real shift. I'll just talk briefly about the Green Home grants, which I'm close to. So lots of decisions have been postponed as a result of this 1 year spending review rather than having a 3-year plan. But the recovery budget, the mini budget in the middle of last year, announced 3 billion for energy efficiency. Of that, 2 billion for housing, and of that 1.5 billion in vouchers. So homeowners can sign up online through a government portal to receive a voucher for £5,000 to install an energy measure. That's an effort by the government to promote people to take up those measures. It's not for gas boilers, it's not for changing your windows, it's for more serious measures like wall insulation and heat pumps. There has been a bumpy start to that project. It was supposed to be delivered by March next year, but they've extended it a whole year. That's because the households didn't know what they wanted and needed more advice, and the installers weren't quite ready to gear up. I think when you talk about putting money into the economy for green jobs, you've got to grow people's ability to deliver those. So I think we need that money quickly, but we also need to bring people along in the training and upskill them at the same time. I think, unfortunately, redundancy next year presents an opportunity to do that. And there is hopefully going to be a big block of funding that people can look at and see a career in. We don't know beyond the next few years in concrete terms. We can only see this sort of short time horizon now to act, and as others have said, a groundswell. So there is funding to the Northwest, and I'm sure Liverpool City Region is getting its fair share. So it's enough for 10,000 houses to be insulated next year. That's delivered by local authorities to vulnerable households on lower incomes, fully funded. That's on top of the voucher scheme. And it's not stuck on the primary measures in the same way the voucher scheme is. We can be a bit more flexible about how we use it. So I could say more about that in questions and answers. I think that covers me, and I'm happy to participate in the questioning. Cheers.
Thanks a lot for that, James. I've got to apologise first of all that we've had a load of questions and we're not going to get to them all, and there won't be an opportunity if we don't get to them for you to get answers later, I'm afraid. And I will get through them as best we can. Now, if our panel want to stick their hand up or something, if there's a question they want to respond to, great. We'll go through them as quickly as we can. Pauline and Tanya ask, how can or should local councils and the government support businesses so they aren't financially disadvantaged running their business in a way which is best for the local community, best for the environment, and best for the planet? Maybe Liz, you want to go on that one, sort of local council stuff.
Yeah, I think possibly it's best to ask the businesses, to be honest. I mean, what do they suggest that we do? Because at the moment we've got we don't consider it. It's in our plan that we will use environmental impact assessments on all our policies. They'll have to pass through an environmental impact assessment, and every policy that we make, every decision we make, we'll have to say whether it's going to increase greenhouse gas emissions or reduce, whether it's going to improve biodiversity or make things worse for biodiversity. So perhaps we need to have that in mind with the businesses we deal with, so differential business rates. Okay. What would the businesses themselves suggest?
Well, Angela's not a business sort of business, but you wanted to respond.
I think thanks Roger. I think from our point of view as a CIC, I think that we spend a huge amount of time thinking about and filling in funding applications, and it takes up a huge amount of our time administratively and manpower and all of that. And it's time that would be much better spent actually on delivery in it. So I wonder whether there's a different way to assess whether CICs or people who are working in this area are deserving of the funds by actually visiting the projects rather than rather than kind of going through this huge rigmarole of funding applications and things. And then the second thing I just wanted to mention is the funding around social prescribing. So obviously we're part of the social prescribing network and work with several of the people here. But actually when somebody is socially prescribed to grow wellbeing, i.e. it would be really good for you to go and spend time outdoors or time at forest school, we don't actually receive any funding for that. So we've just launched the Act of Kindness. In the first day, we've had 20 sessions bought by members of the public. But actually, the Green Social Prescribing Network isn't underpinned by funding. So again, I just think that there's some bottlenecks where we could be encouraging people on a local level, as was talked about earlier, to spend more time outdoors and you know, do more work against climate change and things and learn more. But actually, there are some issues around the funding for that. Okay,
Brendon or Joe, or you're right on that one, as business people as well. I didn't refer to you.
I'd just say very, very quickly that it's if the council's procurement policies weighted against sustainability, so they actually help to encourage the local supply chain to be able to bid for contracts, but weighted them against sustainability criteria, then getting more business is probably better for the local economy and better for the local businesses than having a grant, would be my opinion.
Okay, right, I'll move it on because I do want to try and get many.
Roger, can I just go back to that? Because
sure, Liz, yeah.
Our procurement policy it does have a social value weighting and it does have an environmental weighting. So we are working to make sure that we keep things as local as possible. So that definitely moves in the right direction. So that should be.
We consolidated a lot of these questions in order to get them through. Nick and various other people ask, what stops the government from banning single-use plastics? What would be the argument against it? I think you need the argument against the banning. Any politician want to argue at that? What stops the government? Yes, Angela.
Well, far be it from me to try to read the mind of a Conservative government, and please don't take this as if I have a peculiar insight. But from my time in government as a minister, one of the things that you have to do if you're thinking of a ban on something is to ensure that alternative provision for filling, if it were plastics, you'd have to have access to other things that did the same job. You couldn't just ban it willy-nilly. So you'd have to have a lead in, you'd have to indicate that you were going to do it. If possible, also have a debate about that and consultations so that it was practically possible to do. I mean, I think if I were in government now, I'd also be funding research into some of these plastic eating things that they've discovered, bugs and things, to see if there are other solutions. I'd be wanting to talk to the chemical industry to see what they could do about introducing less environmentally harmful stuff. And so you've got to do this at all levels. And sometimes, though, if things are really seriously damaging immediately, like ozone depleters, they can be banned, as indeed that stuff in aerosols was not long ago, and it helped to close the ozone layer. So you can make a difference, but it's always good to do it yourself as a country. It's even better to try to get international arrangements to do it everywhere.
Isn't it extraordinary, though, that with COVID, which is a problem, the world came together in terms of science to solve it. And yet, what is an equal crisis, it's a bigger crisis, climate change. Nobody's really working on it in that sort of way.
It's because there are, I mean, it's a very, very difficult thing to get everybody to agree. Different countries at different levels of development want, understandably, those countries that have already industrialized to pay more, and I think that's right. It's just very difficult to marshal everybody. And interestingly, if you look at the outbreak of MERS, which is a sort of pretty nasty respiratory disease, which had a far higher fatality rate than COVID, they never developed a vaccine to that because it killed so many people. They managed to isolate it in Asia and it died out. And so if that were to revive in some way, we don't have a vaccine. We only have vaccines developed in the way we have because COVID-19 got out and suddenly it was in everybody's interests to make sure that we could try to fight it. But I agree with you very, very much. I mean, it's been an extraordinary scientific effort, and it demonstrates just how much progress can be made when the world works together cooperatively rather than competitively, and when it works together in the interests of humankind and the planet, rather than in a destructive way, and that cheers me up actually.
And sorry, Brendon, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'd just go back, create a revenue from it to reduce the consumption, tax it, reclassify it as hazardous waste, because that's what it is, single-use plastic. It worked with the plastic bags. We were charged 10p at Morrison's, and all of a sudden everyone's got their own bags, which they take back to the supermarket. The government's going to need more revenue, so tax it, reduce it, and there you go, make some money out of it.
Okay.
But we've got to turn the tap off.
And others says, how can we make it easier for community groups in Wirral to plant trees, find sites to plant trees, and get the relevant permission? I suppose that's particularly to you, Liz.
Yeah, they just need to get in touch, because we've got a team of people who are now working on that. We've just appointed, or in the process of appointing, a new officer, and that will be the primary role for that officer, is to match people, places and trees. So they just need to get in touch with the council, tell us what they want to do.
Really good answer. Don says, campaigners in the region have highlighted the damage that industrial production of soya is causing, with impacts on biodiversity resistance in Indigenous communities. We understand MPs are shortly to debate the report stage of the Environment Bill. Will MPs on tonight's panel be able to push for a due diligence obligation on businesses applying to all unsustainable forest risk commodities, not just illegally produced, and including human rights? Right, who wants to go to that? Margaret, you want to have a go first?
Yes, thank you very much. And I had cited this question just before coming on here, and this isn't something I'd given any thought to. I suspect Don is the Don who I know and is a deeply valued constituent of mine, actually. So Don, if it is the same Don, please do get in touch with me, because I'd be very happy to go into the detail of this with you. It sounds like a really important idea. I can't really expand on it more than that because I haven't really thought about it prior to this, but it seems incredibly important. So if it is Don, who lives in Wirral West, to please furnish me with further information and we can talk about it.
Well, wherever you're from, Don. Alison, do you want to respond? Are you prepared to commit yourself in that kind of a way?
I mean, I agree with Margaret, Roger. It sounds very important, and I'm sure that now we've had it raised with us, we can look at it, and I know Margaret, Angela, and I will look together on that one.
So you're backing her up on that, Angela, as well. The three of you are being held to the fire. Great. Holy Apostles and Martyrs Parish, Live Simply Group, and others say recycling in Wirral is limited compared to other areas. How can recycling be increased on the Wirral, and how can education on recycling be improved? It's probably coming to you again now, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be improved drastically because of the legislation that's coming down the line. So it's been postponed slightly, but the 2023 legislation will mean that all authorities have to recycle a lot more than they have been doing, and it has to be consistent across the country. So at the moment, we're at the mercy of the recycling authority. We're the collection authority, but we're not the disposal authority. So the Merseyside Recycling and Waste Authority don't collect certain plastics and certain other recyclable, potentially recyclable products, and they will do. They'll have to after 2023. So it's going to happen, and in the meantime, residents can, proactively go and find recycling facilities. So you can recycle it. It's a bit more difficult, but we are working towards fast tracking the food recycling. So we'll have food waste recycling on Wirral. Whether we want it or not, it's been rejected previously, but residents just won't be in a position to reject it again because it's going to be national legislation.
All right, Peter, you want to speak? Hang on, Peter first, then Angela, then Annie, and then Margaret. And be quick, all of you, please.
Yeah,
Peter.
Actually, it was just a very quick point, actually, that one of the issues that the MRWA face is contamination of recycling as well. So there has to be a really positive education program that is simple, that people can understand as to what they can and cannot and should not recycle at the moment, irrespective of what stage of types of materials they're taking. What we must do is avoid contamination of existing recycling.
Okay. And Angela, you want to make a quick point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it does take time to educate people to do this properly, and it's good to make it transparent and as I'm sure Wirral will be doing when it's introduced. But nationally, the government can do things like you need to attack the supply chains all along. So packaging, you need to have regulations to ensure that packaging becomes more recyclable. You need to have schemes to pick up white goods and that sort of recycling, and some shops do that, some organisations do that. You've then got to use the tax system, say increase the landfill tax to give incentives to people not to put stuff into landfill, and then make sure that you can finance local authorities who are very, very strapped for cash with some of the tax revenues that come from that kind of taxation. So it's important that everybody works together all along the supply chain.
Okay, and Margaret, you wanted to make a quick point?
Yeah, just a very quick point, really. On the point of education, 2 points, really. On the point of education, whenever I visit schools in Wirral, I'm always really impressed, but particularly primary schools, the amount of work that they do on recycling, and the children are very, very well informed. So I think we have got a generation coming through who are much more au fait with why it's important. So I think that's kind of a positive thing that we need to be aware of. I think it's possibly, you know, the parents that need the further, it's about making things easier for people, isn't it? One of the things that sort of occurred to me is you've got fantastic charities like the Wirral Fuss, you know, free uniforms for secondary schools, where school uniforms are recycled. So children grow very quickly, they grow out of school uniform, that gets donated to another child. So it helps, you know, it helps families who might struggle to afford school uniforms, but also keeps clothing out of our waste systems and keeps them going for a lot longer. But I wanted to mention those things.
And Annie, you wanted to say something on this?
Yeah, just very briefly, just to add to Peter's point, first of all, that I'm conscious that anything around 10% of contamination in a lorry load of recyclables equals landfill. It's not publicly talked about quite often, but that actually is the case. So a plea to anyone to make sure that what you're putting in your recycling bins or in the larger banks can actually go in, because otherwise there is kind of inadvertent contamination. In terms of education, actually the Wirral served quite well, because you've got Lynn Struve, who's the Eco Schools advisor. I'm fairly sure she's the only one still left standing and working across the city region. She's very good. Her work is, or some of her work is part of the Cool Families work. So schools education stuff is happening. I'm not sure, I don't know if Lynn's here, so if she is, she'll probably want to add her own kind of stuff into it. And just from a practical point of view, whilst yes, recycling is important, it's the end of the line. You know what, stop buying this stuff in the first place. You know what, if you really want pizza, if it's got 3 wrappers and you can buy a pizza with 1 and it costs you 25p more, buy the one with 1 or go without. Sorry to sound harsh, it isn't the answer. I'd refer you back to kind of Brendon's presentation for the real answers, but as from an individual household point of view, the best thing is don't buy the stuff, don't buy the packaging in the first place, go without.
Okay, Annie, thank you for that. Diane and others says, we are extremely concerned with the extreme car usage we are seeing, combined with the lack of good, reliable public transport links in my area. Car usage is a big factor in levels of harmful pollution and increasing climate change. What are the council and the other panelists doing to address this problem, please? And what can be done to increase public transport and other forms of non-car travel? I don't want to come to you again, Liz, but I will. But are there other people who'd like to speak about that? Yeah, Brendon.
Yeah, I think we've got to really think about technology and make it simple. I think Margaret talked about convenience. We have to make it easy to use public transport, and we have to have an integrated technology solution which can actually link the trains to the buses to the taxis. So if you want to go to work and you're using public transport, but you're 20 minutes away from a station by walk and it's just not convenient for you, or it's raining, etc., you should be able to book it through an app, get into a taxi, drop you off at the train station, onto the train, onto a bus, and move that way. We have to make it simpler to make it run. And one of the other key things is, could we have the trains running, when obviously post-COVID, Could we have the trains running a bit later from Liverpool back to Wirral so we don't have to get a taxi if we miss the last train after going for a nice meal?
Okay, somebody else on this one. There were quite a few hands up and I've forgotten them all. Alison.
Thanks, Roger. I'm going to resist the temptation to talk at Brendon about train maintenance and overnight maintenance and how long it takes. As a former Network Rail employee, I'm sure everyone would find it fascinating, but I'll not test your patience there. I just wanted to make 2 points on this. It's a really, really, really important question. In different parts of Wirral, we've seen efforts, particularly, and Liz could say more about this, I'm sure, about the kind of new cycle paths that we've got now. We're coming from a very low base, as the person who asked the question has said, and Ed Lamb is one of the organisers who's done a huge amount. Hey Edward, who's done a huge amount in Bevington to campaign nationally for cycling and walking, and we have a lot to do in Wirral. It is getting better, but too slowly. So personally, I think we have to have a conversation with the public about making sure that every year we get more people walking and cycling, and we try to take on this issue about how many people get in their cars in the Wirral. I think it's if I were to ask my constituents what is important to them, road safety always comes up really high on the list, and I think that's indicative of where we are, and we just need to keep pushing forward on it and working together. Second point, and then I'll shut up. The city region, I think, has huge plans and a lot of capacity to improve public transport, particularly when it comes to buses, and the idea that Brendon just put forward, which is about making sure it's properly integrated. Our buses have been run separately by individual companies, and it just never really worked properly. We need coordination by Merseytravel, and we're moving in that direction, I believe, and I think we will go further. But if we just think about the kinds of people who use buses compared to private cars, we know that it's families, it's young people, we have such capacity to do social good by having a really good public transport network. And then if you get the fuel right, if you get the power right, then it's good for the environment as well. So I think we've got a lot to do, and I would really welcome the support of people in this group in keeping the pressure on to make sure that we do it over the next few years to come.
Angela, you want to say something? I don't think there's anybody else, but Angela.
Just briefly, I agree very strongly with Alison about deregulation. And there's two Angelas, so if
I'm quite happy that you're doing it. She is too. Go on.
You need to be more specific, and I'll shut up and let the other Angela talk.
No. Have you? All right, the other Angela then, Angela Samata.
Just a very quick thing, just to add on top of that Liz and all of your team are doing a huge amount to bring green spaces into housing estates, and bring provision like forest school and growing into estates, so that people are having to use transport less to get to green spaces. And I think that's a really, really important local initiative. So conversations around Beechwood and various different estates. And Angela Eagle, please don't give me your workload. I might be another Angela, but I definitely can't take your workload.
Okay, we'll move on to another I may, because we are running a little late on time. Al says, regarding transport, the concept of free parking, in inverted commas, for private vehicles generally enjoys broad mainstream political support at all levels of government. How can this bogus concept be dismantled? I mean, it's not unrelated to what we've been talking about, but anybody got any ideas? Yeah, Liz.
That's under review at the moment. It's quite controversial. He's absolutely right. It's picked up by some politicians and used as a political campaign. And I'm not going to gamble on this, but if I did, I would put a lot of money on the fact that it's likely to be a campaign in May, that because we're going to have to consider bringing back parking charges, and that will have an impact on the environment, because if people choose to avoid taking their car, then they'll be walking, cycling, they'll be using public transport. if it's free parking, it's much more attractive to use your car. So we've got to think about it like that. It's really, really important that we don't use, we don't subsidise driving, basically, which is what we've been doing. So it's a very important question, and it's likely to be a political campaign. So just
I remember the row over New Brighton's free parking, which still rumbles on. There are any others on the free parking issue, the bogus concept? Okay. What is the biggest barrier to having solar panels? This comes from, not sure who, Moira. What is the biggest barrier to having solar panels as mandatory on new house build? Yes, Angela. Eagle.
It's likely to be supply, I would have thought. I think that we could do much more, and the government could do much more with the way that it changes building regulations to ensure that at least new build, these things become compulsory. So you'd have to signal to the market that you wanted more of these things built. You'd have to say when the building regulations were going to change. And then introduce that. I'd like to see it done sooner rather than later, but I suspect that the current government will be worried about getting its house building numbers up, and will, if you're going to make changes to building regulations like that, it sometimes slows the amount of building that's done as the market adjusts. So I suspect that we're not doing nearly enough with respect to ensuring by building regulations and requirement that houses being built now are going to be more carbon neutral and less unsustainable.
I wondered, I'll come to James, but I wondered about Joe, because you don't build houses as such, but Peel are very much building things. Do you think about solar panels when you're doing that?
We do think about solar panels, but we also have to think about the scale and what's going to bring the biggest energy savings overall, and what's going to be at the right price for the people who are going to be on the receiving end of it. So, for example, district heat networks are very efficient in terms of the energy they use at the moment, and you can also provide very sort of cheap heat to people as well, because the last thing we want to do is to push people into fuel poverty. So I think really, especially on the larger scale that we deal at, it's looking at the right solution. And at the moment, heat pumps, people are talking about using more heat pumps. Ultimately, I think it's all about the government pushing forward the policies that make it easier for renewables generally. And really, we need to at least double the rate of renewables in the UK if we're going to meet our carbon reductions. And the quickest and the most efficient way of us all meeting those reductions is if we decarbonise the national grid, and that has to be done through government policy.
Okay. James, you wanted to speak.
Just to gloss those points, really, I think the Committee on Climate Change report out this week, among lots of other things, said bring forward the net zero standard for housing to 2033. And I believe that in the 10-point plan, it was trailed this idea that we'd be bringing in the new home standard, but to 2023 rather than 2025. And that's the one that calls for the phasing out of gas boilers. So if those are implemented and become policy levers, you get to the point where you've no choice. You've got to go with an electric heating system, whereupon a solar panel becomes a good way to heat water as well as just run your electrics, whereupon you can have a lot more on your roof. And if you're using a net zero standard, then that would all be synergistic. At the moment, people install panels, they don't use the energy in the day, and they try and find the value from the grid. If we can fix those mechanisms with regulation, I think regulation underlies everything, doesn't it? Level playing field, and so I'd be hopeful that solar can have a kind of return in spite of some of the subsidy having going, because it will actually be cost effective to do it. It's not just about the new build, it needs to be on all of our...
Right, in a moment, I've got a question that's going to go around to all of you to finish off with, but before that, why is the Labour Party, I'm not sure who this comes from, why is the Labour Party wedded to a Mersey barrage? I understand that building a barrage will take time that we don't have, and also is not cost effective. Offshore wind, as I understand it, will be much more cost effective. Anybody want to have a bash at that? Yes, Alison.
So we've committed, or well, Steve Rotherham, who's the Metro Mayor, committed to investigate it because it's a possibility, because it's an option. And I think that's the right thing to do. There was quite a bit of work done on it previously, and it was found to have some challenges, but things have moved on and the technology's moved on. So we're looking at it again. I have to say, I don't think it's either or. I think that as James just said, regulation is at the key here. We need the government to push ahead with targets. And then, as Angela was just saying previously, we need to indicate the direction that policy is going and give the suppliers of energy products the chance to build up supply and to understand the direction we're going in as a country. That's why it's really important that we have well-developed policy, and that's what the Committee on Climate Change does. And I think it's for all of us to commit that this is the direction that we're going in. I think that the barrage is one project that we need to look at, investigate, work up, and then over time develop. But I don't see that as excluding other forms of renewable energy. In fact, I think the best thing is to try and progress them together, as was done with solar panels previously, and to try and invest over the long term and make sure that we continually make sure that we're making our energy sources more and more green over time.
Angela Eagle, you wanted to say something.
Just briefly, obviously, in that assessment of the potential for tidal power, you have to look at environmental damage and whether you can replace the habitats, and that's all part of what I understand the assessments of these things are. So we'll have to look to see how that comes out. You also need a mix of energy because wind power, I think we have something like a quarter of all the wind power potential in the whole of Europe, believe it or not, but most of that's up in Scotland, a little bit off our coast and the other side. But you have to have a mix. You have to have a mix of intermittent supply and things base load, so that if it stops, if the wind stops, and it's you can carry on supplying the grid. So there's a range of things you've got to do, and it's all got to fit together. But I certainly wouldn't be in favour of having tidal power if it did so much damage to the local ecology that you caused a problem there. That's got to be assessed.
Okay, I've got a final question for you. Oh, sorry, Joe, do you want to respond as well? Did I see you wave your hand?
Yeah, thanks. Just to say that I think I agree with everybody. There's no silver bullet on this one. It's going to be a range of solutions. And there's really exciting stuff going on in terms of energy storage at the moment, using graphene to be able to into battery storage to be able to store our energy more effectively. That's going to be great. We're looking at hydrogen and using all the horrible waste plastics that people don't difficult to get into the recycling system at the moment, using those to make hydrogen, which could then be blended into it to decarbonise energy supply. So I think it's going to be a range of things.
Okay. As I say, I've got a final question to give to you all, give you a minute each, and this is it. Will the panellists tell us what they plan to do in the next 2 to 3 months that will help the UK meet its net zero targets? And what one action would they ask attendees, viewers and listeners to take? So what are you going to be doing, and what do you hope that we will do? I'll go around on my screen. Brendon, you're up my top left.
Well, I'm going to continue to develop changing streams to reduce plastic. Personally, I think if there's one action is swap out a plastic item out of your shopping basket and try and use the new plastic-free stores and shop local and buy just what you need. Avoid waste. Convenience. It's not convenient when the plastic stays around for 600 years. So just try and avoid it as much as possible.
Okay. Angela Samata.
Well, we're going to carry on with our acts of kindness and try and get as many families and young people into the forest, and we're just going to continue with that. And thank you, by the way, because as we've been talking, people have been buying their acts of kindness, so thank you so much to everybody who's done that tonight. Thank you.
And Joe?
I'm going to say count your carbon. we're going to be counting our carbon in the Edgerton Village project that we're on Wirral Waters. Whether you're a business or an individual, you can think about what you're buying and count your carbon.
Margaret, do you know that your screen says Margaret, by the way? It doesn't say Margaret.
That isn't down to me, can I say? I don't know who did that, but I need to have words with whoever. Most frustrating. Thank you for pointing that out. So we haven't talked about it this evening, but I'm going to carry on campaigning against the government's plans to change the planning regime, because I think it has the potential to be absolutely devastating, particularly for green spaces near to urban areas, and in line with, you know, what was said about forest schools and so forth, the importance of people being able to access the natural world, plus also just protecting our you know, all of the species and so forth that are reliant on those habitats is going to be really important. So I think that's a very urgent challenge for this year. And in terms of what I would say to people, the thing to do is to carry on campaigning, because campaigns make a difference. So that would be my ask of people.
Peter Owen.
Yeah, okay, well, what will I be doing? Well, with our charity, we're trying to improve energy efficiency in homes anyway, so we'll redouble our efforts there. I will hopefully be able to have some conversations with James about the new Green Homes grant and maybe making it work better. And also, as I said earlier, about with my cool hat on, effectively capture the measures that and the activities that are going on. And what one actually would ask attendees and viewers and listeners to take, actually go to the back of the cool strategy, and in there is a little template there for you to review your own personal impacts on the environment. Maybe have a go at that. Just sit down, have a cup of coffee, and think, okay, what am I doing? What are my impacts? What could I do simply? And then just start from there.
Fair enough. Annie.
Okay, so as an organisation, Faiths for Change are committed to reducing our carbon footprint considerably. So we already started measuring it and setting a target for net zero. So we'll be doing that in the next few months. Individually, I shall continue to be picking up plastic from Crosby Beach, which I live quite close to. What actions would I encourage other people to take? Probably a bit like Peter, actually. I'd encourage people to have a go at doing their own personal carbon footprint, either as the suggestion that Peter had there, things, organisations like WWF do a really simple online one. It's not that accurate, but it will give you a bit of an idea, and you can play around with it and take out different things, so you can sort of see how you can actually reduce your carbon footprint. It's free and it takes a few minutes.
And James.
Well, I'll say talk to Peter about green home grants and do my day job. But I think I suppose commuting patterns have changed as a result of COVID, and I think there's an opportunity there to revitalise high streets. And so I'm not very good at shopping locally, but I'm going to try and change that as my New Year's resolution. We can maybe have some thriving community shops replacing some of the things that have unfortunately gone to the wall. So.
High street needs it, you're right. Liz.
Thanks. I'm going to keep pushing the carbon literacy training that we have in the council that we've started having. I'm going to make sure that as many people as possible have that training in full. So we want every councillor and every officer to be fully carbon literate, so they know the facts of the problems that we're facing, and so they know the sheer scale of the actions that we need to take. In terms of recommending actions for residents, I'd advise making a noise, just similar to what Margaret said, really, just make a noise and object to anything that is making the situation worse, and support, please, any measures we do. I think Alison's referred to this as well. Support what we're doing locally and nationally, anybody who's trying to make the situation better. So if we're trying to put a cycle lane in, you know, maybe it's not perfect, but please support it and offer a positive alternative. Don't just object, and don't let other people just hijack it for political purposes. So local residents can make a noise. That would be the most important thing.
Alison.
Over the next few months, I am going to be watching for the impact of Brexit, because I worry that that could have a really negative impact. And I'm specifically going to be asking the Chancellor of the Exchequer to do better when we get the budget in next year to properly invest in this area. And the thing that I would ask everybody to do, and I agree with what other people have said, because these are all good things, so I'm going to say something different. The thing that I would ask everybody to do is to visit Port Sunlight River Park in my constituency. It's a beautiful green space built on a rubbish dump, and have some nice time in a beautiful green open space overlooking the River Mersey, and, you know, contemplate how important this is.
That's nice. Thanks, Alison. And to Regal.
Thank you very much. I think our job as members of Parliament is to try to push the government into getting the policies for achieving net zero and speeding that up right, and also ensuring that in our own political party we get more radical policies that we can put to the electorate at an appropriate time. I would also say I don't disagree with what other people have said, but I think some of the things that you can do yourself, it's not only about packaging. Eat less red meat. That makes an enormous difference to trying to save the planet. Give money to those organisations that are trying to save our ecosystems. Even every little bit helps, and personal behaviour and choices can have a big effect.
Thanks, Angela. And finally, lastly, but not leastly, David Tarpey.
I've taken advantage of a scheme that's done through the NHS car leasing scheme. So I managed to lease myself an electric car, which is actually works out cheaper than an equivalent sort of petrol car through that scheme, because of the I think the lack of business in kind tax. I don't quite fully understand it myself, but it certainly works out nicely. So hopefully with that, we go down to one car and we can use that. That'll be the thing that I've done. And what I would ask people to do again is recycler inhalers. It's a personal project of mine, and I'm going to try and get people to do more and more of that. The other thing I'd ask is, I spend my life telling people not to smoke outside the hospital door, but I've never yet told anyone to stop idling their car outside the hospital door. I think that's one thing we could all do is stop leaving our cars idling outside, outside sort of public spaces, hospitals, schools, those places where vulnerable people are coming in and out.
David, thank you very much, and indeed thanks all of you. Just to end, let me pass you on to Naomi Graham. Naomi is project manager, project and program manager with a focus on environmental projects and management. She used to be a management consultant, then head of IT at Friends of the Earth, and she's now one of the team at Wirral Environmental Network. She runs environmental projects and activities. She's a trustee of Dale Farm Trust and a member of the Wirral Climate Action Group and Planet Heswall. So over to you, Naomi.
Okay, thanks, Roger, and thank you, everybody. It's my lovely job to do the thanks. So I would like to say a huge thanks to all the speakers and panelists for the time that they've devoted this evening, thinking about what they're going to be saying, and then spending some time to answer their questions. And it's good, really good to hear about all the current activity that's taking place and what you're going to be doing. We also need to thank Wirral Climate Action Group for pulling this event together, to Rethink Now CIC and the Cool Wirral Partnership, and to Roger. Roger, thank you for hosting so well. We had a packed agenda, so we look forward to doing it again. We've got more people who wanted to speak, so we look forward to being able to do something else in the spring. There's been a couple of key themes that have come out tonight. I think the main one being is that there's obviously a real appetite on the Wirral to focus on addressing the climate emergency. And I know that panelists and attendees want to see action. There's been lots of things that have come up, and I'm sure Wirral Climate Action Group will be following through the themes. There's lots of questions that haven't been answered, so we'll see what we can do about looking at the whole themes and getting some responses out on that. There is a lot already happening on the Wirral, and I would encourage everybody to get involved. Wirral could be the greenest borough in the UK. I think it's a good thing to aim for. And if I can ask everybody to look at that Cool Wirral strategy, see what needs to be done on the Wirral and what can be done. Look up and link up with the hundreds of organisations that are across the Wirral that are doing something to address climate emergency and improve our environment. We've got friends of groups, we've got charities, we've got businesses, we've got large organisations all working to improve our environment and address climate change. You can see them on the big green list, which is hosted on the Wirral Environmental Network website. Or contact Wirral Climate Action Group or myself, and we'll point you towards it. And take action. We've had lots of brilliant ideas. I've been scribbling them all down, and I'm going to be watching the recording. But do one thing and then do another. That's all I can ask. And thank you everyone so much. This has been Wirral Speaks on Climate Change, and have a lovely evening and good night.
Good night to you all. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.